All right, guys. So let's give this FRQ a try. And I apologize for how bad the writing's about to be. I'm trying to get used to this thing too. So we have the Tierra Bank. This is from 2012 FRQ. We have a balanced bank balance sheet here. We have $100,000 of liabilities, $100,000 of assets. And the first question asks, what is the reserve requirement? Okay, so again, the reserve requirement is how much the bank is required to keep in reserves in the bank that they can't loan out. All right, so we can see here that the demand deposits, basically what's in checking, is $100,000, and the required reserve currently is $10,000. Okay, we'll get to excess in just a minute. This is excess is just basically the money that they could loan out that they haven't loaned out yet for whatever reason. Okay. So they're required to hold on to 10 of the $100,000. So first question, pretty straightforward. What is the reserve requirements? Okay, well, if the required reserve is at 10,000, okay, and the total amount that's in the bank is 100,000. Okay, simple mental math here. Remember, no calculators. That's going to give us a reserve requirement of 10%. Okay, so the reserve requirement is 10%. All right, check. First point. Now, part B. Assume that Luis comes in and withdraws $5,000 in cash from his checking account at Tierra. Okay, now he comes and he withdraws the $5,000. That's a liability to the bank, right? So that $100,000 right there is going to turn into $95,000, right? Because Luis just came and took $5,000. All right, so this is now sitting at $95,000. All right, it was $100,000. Luis came, demanded $5,000 from his checking account. They take it out. Okay, that's $95,000. Now, you may be thinking, okay, well, these things need a balance. So what do we do to the asset side to keep these things balanced? Okay, well, that $5,000 comes right from here, right? That's $5,000 that they had in excess reserves that has now been loaned out to Luis. So currently in excess reserves, and this is going to change in just a minute, but let's just say it's zero for the time being, okay? So by how much will Tierra's reserves change based on Luis's withdrawal? Okay, they're going to change by $5,000. It's just that simple. $5,000. It's a change of $5,000 because Luis just came and took out his $5,000. Okay, that's part I. Okay, now part two to B. Okay, so great question. What is the initial effect of the withdrawal on the M1 measure of money supply? Okay, now go back to your knowledge of the M1 money supply. What is considered M1? Cash, okay, and checking. So this was money that was in checking, and Luis just withdrew it into cash. Okay. So what is the effect on the M1 measure of the money supply? There is no effect. Okay. No effect. Why? Because cash and checking are both classifications of M1. So the amount that is actually in M1, it doesn't change. Okay. So there's no effect. No effect. And then for the explanation, you could just say money classification changes. Money classification changes. Okay, again, there's no change to the amount that's in M1. All right, because you guys know that M1 consists of cash and checking. All that happened was that cash changed classification from checking to cash. Okay, but both are considered M1. All right. Now on to part 3. Okay, and this is where it starts to get a little bit tricky. Okay, but just make sure this makes sense one piece at a time. Okay, so as a result of the withdrawal, what is the new value of excess reserves on the balance sheet of Tierra Bank based on the reserve requirement from part A? So I told you this is only going to be temporarily zero. Okay, actually, it's never zero. We just left it at zero for just a second here. Okay, now what is the reserve requirement? It's 10%. Okay, now that right there never changed. Okay, only the Fed is going to change that, and we're not there yet. Basically, just know the reserve requirement does not change. Okay, so if before there was $100,000, now there's $95,000. 10% of 95,000 is not 10,000. 10% of 95,000 is 9,500. Okay, so we now have 9,500 in here. Let's see if I can write that. Okay, so 9,500. Okay, 9,500. Okay, so this was 10,000 that was in required, and it just became 9,500. Okay, so where does that $500 go from 10,000 to 10,000 to 9,500? It jumps down here into excess reserves. Okay, so the excess reserves now is $500. Okay, that's the trickiest part. I know that's tricky. Okay, but you have to think about it here. The demand deposits when Luis came changed from 100,000 to 95,000. Okay, now they are no longer required to hold on to 10,000 because 10,000 was 10% of 100,000. But now there's only 95,000 in demand deposits, which means they only have to hold on to 9,500 now. Okay, 10% of 95,000 is 9,500. Now, before the required reserve are 10,000, now they're 9,500. So now there's $500 of excess reserves at this point. Okay. All right. All right. So let's wrap this thing up. Now, part C says, let's see, move this thing. Okay, part C says, assume the next day John now comes to the bank and he withdraws from me, Tierra Bank, an amount that exceeds the bank's excess reserves. Assuming that no loans are called in, okay, how can me, Tierra Bank, cover its required reserves? So we're not here at this point yet, okay? You haven't been taught this, okay? But for right now, what I want you guys to write is me, Tierra, can get money from the central bank, okay, the central bank, at what's called the discount rate. And we don't know what that means yet either. We'll get there. At the discount rate, okay? Or from other banks, this, at the federal funds rate. Okay, so go ahead and write that down for now. Me, Tierra, can get money from the central bank. So basically, banks borrow from each other as well. We're going to get more into that tomorrow. Okay, but me, Tierra, can get money from the central bank at what's called the discount rate. That's an interest rate, or from other banks at what is called the federal funds rate. Okay, let's leave it at that for now. We'll talk more about what those two things mean, the federal funds rate and the discount rate. But just see if A and B, if you can work your way through A and B and make sure that these two things make sense, you're going to be in good shape. And if this video didn't help, give this Clifford video a try as well. Okay, I'll get this video posted on Classroom. He, of course, is better at explaining things than I am. So, work your way through my video and his video and just see if you can kind of decipher where those answers are coming from for A, B, and C. Okay, you guys are awesome. Keep working hard.